morning and welcome to the show. The topic this morning is the Civil Rights Movement Revisited, and we are talking to two participants of the Civil Rights Movement, Dr. Bernard Lafayette, who is the Vice President for Academic Affairs at American Baptist College, and Dr. Fred Cloud, who is the Professor of Sociology at the same institution. And let me welcome both of you to the show this morning, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Morning.
One of the things that we'd like to talk about this morning is the Freedom Rides. And of course, both of you were participants not only in the Freedom Rides, but you both played very, very important roles in the Civil Rights Movement itself. And what we'd like to do is to start off by talking about the Civil Rights Movement and the impact that the Civil Rights Movement had upon American society. Let's start with you, Dr. Lafayette, and of course, Dr. Cloud, you'll give us some information after Dr. Lafayette has given us that information.
Thank you, Dr. Haney. I would say that the modern-day Civil Rights Movement actually began with the Montgomery movement in 1955, which was led by Martin Luther King. That movement, you might say, catapulted Martin Luther King into national prominence and international recognition. Following that Montgomery movement, as I can pinpoint the different movements, was 1960. When we had the sit-in movement. Of course, Nashville was very much a part of that and gave some important leadership to the sit-in movement. The movement then turned in the direction of the Freedom Rides of 1961, when this trek was taken down through the Deep South, testing out the various reactions to the ICC ruling, which I'll talk about later. The movement then followed 1962 with the Albany movement. And then, of course, we had the Birmingham movement, and we had the Selma movement. And all of these movements then followed, that was the Chicago movement. We also had a movement in St. Augustine, Florida. Well, the movement took on a very dramatic thrust, beginning with the Supreme Court decision of 1954, which then spelled out the fact that separate but equal was no longer a valid concept.
Yeah, I think that's important, Dr. Lafayette, if we could sort of push that in terms of what did the Civil Rights Movement attempt to undo or to go around. And I think that in order to do that, we'll have to talk about the 1954 decision.
Sure.
Let's bring Dr. Cloud in at this particular point, and then we'll get back to you dealing with that. Dr. Cloud, why don't you give us some information relative to what American society was like as a sociologist prior to the 1954 decision?
Well, segregation was a kind of quasi-legal continuation of slavery. We don't like to admit it, those of us who are majority members, but actually the Jim Crow laws were an effort to beat the devil around the stump and to keep the society divided, with the former slaves really not having equal access to education, housing, employment. And we still have vestiges of some of the kinds of things that were done to intimidate the former slaves, the black population. The Ku Klux Klan was used to intimidate persons, and when persons had the courage, the vision, and the forthrightness to speak out, they were beaten, or their homes were shot. Sometimes they were lynched. So where we're coming from is a society that had not yet, by and large, with a few exceptions, had not addressed the fact that slavery was passed and that the black population was entitled to be treated as free citizens with equal opportunity.
Very good. And I think that, Dr. Lafayette, you can add in terms of the legislation, I think, too, in terms of the Civil Rights Movement, we're talking about legislation. Why don't you talk about the 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendments and how that fit into the Civil Rights Movement?
Well, I think that it's important to recognize that the behavior that was displayed by many of the citizens in this country that was negative towards people of color had legal sanction. And I think this is the point you're making. There are laws on the books that gave certain rights to those who had blacks in their, as subjects, and they were slaves. So the legal sanction were the things that the civil rights movement really hit at. And the NAACP had a consistent campaign at trying to eradicate those laws or overturn those state laws that really supported segregation. Now, we depended upon the federal legislation and the Constitution in order to do that, because these states, deep southern states, the legislatures were not about to make those kind of changes. And there have been some changes that we have acknowledged in the recent past that has been important, such as the fair housing laws and that sort of thing, et cetera. Now, when it comes to, for example, to the 14th Amendment, we find that that amendment is used more by corporate government, corporate relationships between government and the corporate community in terms of exercising their rights to do business and not experience discrimination.
But what was the original purpose of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution? Dr. Cloud, and we'll follow that up, but as you indicated, it was used for another purpose. But what was the original purpose? Dr. Cloud, would you like to speak to that? What was the purpose of the 14th Amendment?
These amendments were to get past the idea that blacks were less than full persons. At one time, they were considered 3/5 of a man. They were saying persons of color are fully human American citizens entitled to the full protection of the laws. And the amendments passed in 1866 were revived in the 1960s by lawyers who saw that here was really a hidden time bomb, as it were, in favor of freedom. And the 1866 amendment was used to give people property rights and employment rights that were buried in the Constitution that had not been passed as discrete laws.
Very good. But well, would it be safe to say that within that context that the civil rights movement really represented an effort on the part of the black population to secure those rights that were already guaranteed to them at an earlier period in the Constitution? That is, the 14th Amendment made them whole citizens, or complete citizens. The 15th Amendment gave them the right to vote.
Now, Howard Thurman, I want to lift up at this point that the religious leadership of the black community was crucial. It was not accidental or incidental that Dr. King, Dr. LaFayette, you, I are all clergy. Howard Thurman tells in his autobiography, With Heart and Mind, that his grandmother, who was born in slavery, used to tell about a slave preacher who would say to his hearers, you are not a slave, you are a child of God. And it is very important for all of us to remember that the thing that sustained the black population, by and large, in their quest for equal opportunity was the self-image as children of God, that they derived their worth not just from the Constitution of the United States, but from their Creator. And I think it's very important early on for us to see how significant it was that Dr. King bought into a tradition of nonviolence that had not only Gandhi from India, but Henry David Thoreau, an American, with his essay on civil disobedience, that I think it's very, very important for American history and for us today to recognize that the quest for equal opportunity on the part of people of color was done in a nonviolent way, appealing not to preferential treatment, no reverse discrimination, but to being treated as fully human beings created as all others are in the image of God by a Creator who sees all as persons of infinite worth.
Very good. Dr. LaFayette,